"Stop the music, now." The command echoed through Madison Square Garden with an urgency that froze every member of Michael Jackson's crew mid-performance. In the middle of Man in the Mirror, one of his most emotionally charged songs, the King of Pop had just done something unprecedented in his entire career. He had stopped performing because of what he saw in the crowd. What happened next between Michael and a complete stranger would become one of the most powerful moments in music history, proving that sometimes the greatest performances happen when the music stops. It was September 17, 1988, and Madison Square Garden was packed with 20,000 fans witnessing what many considered the most technically ambitious tour of Michael's career. The Bad World Tour wasn't just a concert series, it was a cultural phenomenon. Every show sold out within hours, and tonight's New York performance had attracted celebrities, music industry executives, and devoted fans who had waited years for this moment. The energy in the garden was electric from the opening notes. Michael's entrance had been spectacular, rising from beneath the stage in a cloud of smoke, while thousands of camera flashes turned the arena into a galaxy of light. Song after song, he delivered perfection. Every dance move was precise, every vocal note crystal clear, every interaction with the crowd carefully choreographed to maximize emotional impact. But what nobody in Madison Square Garden knew was that Michael was carrying a weight that threatened to crush him. Earlier that day, a major newspaper had published an article questioning his mental stability, calling him disconnected from reality, and suggesting his emotional performances were nothing more than calculated manipulation. The words had cut deep, touching the very core of Michael's insecurities about whether people saw the real him or just a carefully constructed persona. His closest friend and choreographer, Vincent Patterson, had found Michael sitting alone in his dressing room an hour before showtime, staring at his reflection in the mirror with an expression of profound sadness. He wasn't seeing the superstar everyone else saw, Vincent later recalled. He was seeing all the ways he felt he was failing to be authentic, all the accusations of being fake echoing in his mind. As the concert progressed through hits like Smooth Criminal and Billie Jean, Michael's performance was flawless on the surface, but those who knew him well could see something different in his eyes tonight. He was searching the crowd more intensely than usual, as if looking for validation that his emotions were real, that his connection with people mattered beyond the spectacle of fame. Then came Man in the Mirror, the song that meant more to Michael than perhaps any other in his catalog. It was his anthem of personal transformation, his plea for self-reflection and change. As he began singing about making that change and looking at yourself honestly, Michael moved to the front of the stage for the song's most vulnerable moment. That's when he saw her. In the third row, barely visible through the stage lights and the sea of faces, a young woman was sobbing uncontrollably. But it wasn't the joyful crying that often happened at his concerts. This was something different. This was the kind of crying that came from a place of deep, unbearable pain. Her body was shaking, her hands covering her face, and she seemed completely unaware of the thousands of people around her. Michael's performance instinct told him to continue, to maintain the show's momentum, and let security handle whatever was happening in the crowd. But something about this woman's pain reached through all his professional training and touched something raw and human in him. In that moment, he wasn't the king of pop performing for thousands. He was one broken soul recognizing another. Without consciously deciding to do so, Michael stopped singing mid-verse. The backing track continued for a few seconds before his band, confused by the interruption, began to fade the music. 20,000 people fell into bewildered silence as Michael stood frozen at the front of the stage, staring down at the crying woman. His tour manager's voice crackled urgently in his earpiece. "Michael, what's happening? Are you okay? Should we cut to the next song?" But Michael didn't respond. He was completely focused on the woman, and what he saw in her face reflected something he recognized from his own darkest moments, the look of someone who felt completely alone despite being surrounded by people. Michael made a gesture that shocked everyone, including his own crew. He signaled for all the music to stop completely. As the last notes faded and Madison Square Garden fell into total silence, Michael did something that went against every rule of professional performance. He knelt down at the edge of the stage and spoke directly to the woman. His voice picked up by his headset microphone and broadcast throughout the entire arena. "Ma'am, are you okay?" His voice was gentle, concerned, stripped of any performance quality. This was just one human being reaching out to another. The woman looked up, her tear-stained face showing complete shock that Michael Jackson was speaking directly to her. I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to disrupt your show. I should leave." "No," Michael said firmly but kindly. "Please don't leave. What's your name?" The woman hesitated, clearly overwhelmed by the attention of both Michael and the entire arena now watching this unexpected interaction. "Rebecca," she finally whispered, though her voice was amplified throughout the garden. "Rebecca," Michael repeated, his voice filled with genuine warmth. I need you to know something. This show, these songs, they're not more important than you. If you're hurting, that matters more than any performance. The crowd remained silent, stunned by what they were witnessing. This wasn't part of the planned show. This was raw, unscripted human connection happening in real time. But Michael wasn't finished. What he did next would leave everyone in Madison Square Garden in tears. Rebecca, can you tell me what's wrong? You don't have to if you don't want to, but I'm here to listen if you need someone. The vulnerability in Michael's question was stunning. Here was one of the most famous people in the world, in the middle of a sold-out concert, making himself completely available to a stranger's pain. Rebecca's story came out in broken fragments, amplified throughout the arena so everyone could hear. She had lost her younger sister to cancer 3 days ago. Her sister had been a devoted Michael Jackson fan, and they had bought these concert tickets together 6 months earlier. Rebecca had come tonight to honor her sister's memory, but the grief had overwhelmed her during Man in the Mirror, her sister's favorite song. She used to say that your music made her feel less alone when she was going through treatment, Rebecca said through her tears. She would listen to your songs and believe that things could get better, and now she's gone, and I don't know how to survive this pain. 20,000 people were crying now, not just for Rebecca's loss but for the profound humanity of what they were witnessing. Michael Jackson, the superstar, had disappeared. In his place was simply Michael, a man who understood pain and loneliness, reaching out to comfort someone who needed it desperately. Michael's eyes filled with tears that were clearly visible on the arena's massive screens. Rebecca, what was your sister's name? Sarah, Rebecca answered. Her name was Sarah. Michael stood up slowly, wiping his eyes, and addressed both Rebecca and the entire arena. Tonight, we're going to do something different. We're going to sing Man in the Mirror again, not as a performance, but as a tribute to Sarah. And Rebecca, I want you to sing it with me, because your sister's spirit is here, and she needs to know that the changes she wanted to see in the world started with the love she shared with you. What happened next became legendary in music history. Michael Jackson invited Rebecca onto the stage. Security helped her climb up, and suddenly she was standing next to her idol, still crying but also beginning to smile through her tears. Michael took her hand and signaled for the band to start Man in the Mirror again from the beginning. This time, the performance was completely different. Michael sang with an emotional rawness that went beyond anything his fans had ever heard from him. Every word was infused with genuine feeling. Every note carried the weight of shared human pain. And when the chorus came, he held the microphone toward Rebecca, encouraging her to sing. Rebecca's voice was shaky and far from perfect, but it didn't matter. 20,000 people joined in, singing together in honor of a young woman they'd never met, united in their shared humanity and the understanding that grief and loss connect us all. The arena was filled with phone lights, swaying gently, creating a sea of light that honored Sarah's memory. As the song reached its powerful climax, Michael put his arm around Rebecca's shoulders and sang directly to her, making it clear that every word of hope and change in the lyrics was meant for her healing. When the final notes faded, the applause was different from any other applause Michael had ever received. It wasn't the screaming adulation of fans celebrating a superstar. It was the grateful, tearful acknowledgement of thousands of people who had just witnessed something sacred, a moment when fame and spectacle disappeared and only love and compassion remained. Michael hugged Rebecca for a long time while the crowd continued to applaud. Then he spoke quietly to her, words meant only for her but picked up by his microphone. Sarah's love lives on in you, Rebecca. Every time you show kindness to someone, every time you help someone who's hurting, she's there. You're going to survive this grief, and you're going to help other people survive theirs. That's how we honor the people we've lost. Before Rebecca left the stage, Michael did something that surprised even his own crew. He took off his iconic black fedora, the one he'd worn throughout the entire tour, and placed it gently on her head. This is for Sarah, he said. Tell her story. Let people know that her life mattered and that her love for music connected her to millions of people she never met. The rest of the concert continued, but everyone in Madison Square Garden knew they had witnessed something that transcended entertainment. Social media didn't exist yet in 1988, but the story spread rapidly through newspapers, television, and word of mouth. The footage of Michael stopping his show to comfort Rebecca became one of the most replayed moments in music television history. But the real story was what happened after the camera stopped rolling. Michael's response to Rebecca's pain didn't end when she left the stage. In the weeks that followed, he personally reached out to her family, attending a private memorial service for Sarah and establishing a scholarship fund in her name for young cancer patients who wanted to pursue careers in music or the arts. Rebecca Morrison, whose full name was later revealed, became an advocate for grief counseling and support services. She often spoke about how Michael's compassion in her darkest moment had given her the strength to transform her pain into purpose. He showed me that vulnerability isn't weakness, she told CNN in a 1990 interview. He showed me that the most powerful thing we can do is acknowledge each other's pain and respond with love instead of looking away. The Madison Square Garden incident profoundly changed Michael as well. His choreographer, Vincent Patterson, noticed an immediate shift in how Michael approached his performances. After that night, he stopped worrying so much about whether people thought his emotions were authentic, Vincent recalled. He realized that authenticity isn't about proving yourself to critics. It's about being present for the people in front of you and responding to real human needs when you see them. Michael began incorporating more spontaneous moments of connection into his concerts, often pausing to acknowledge individuals in the crowd who seemed to be struggling or celebrating significant moments. His security team was trained not to immediately remove people who were emotional or disruptive, but to assess whether they needed support rather than ejection. The incident also inspired Michael to expand his charitable work significantly. Within a year, he had established the Heal the World Foundation, which focused specifically on helping children dealing with grief, illness, and trauma. He never publicized the extent of his charitable giving, but posthumous revelations showed that he donated hundreds of millions of dollars to causes supporting people in emotional and physical pain. Rebecca and Michael maintained a friendship until his death in 2009. She attended several more of his concerts, always as his personal guest, and they exchanged letters in which they discussed their shared understanding of how pain and compassion could coexist. When Michael died, Rebecca was among those who spoke at his memorial service, sharing how his kindness to her had rippled out to touch thousands of others through her own advocacy work. That night in Madison Square Garden, Michael taught everyone watching that our achievements and our fame and our success mean nothing if we can't stop and care for someone who's hurting, Rebecca said in her tribute. He showed us that the bravest thing a person can do is make themselves vulnerable in service of someone else's healing. That's the Michael Jackson I knew, not the superstar, but the human being who understood pain and chose to respond with love. The cultural impact of that September night extended far beyond Michael's immediate circle. Psychologists began using the footage as a teaching tool for empathy and emotional intelligence. The video became a standard resource in training programs for crisis counselors, demonstrating how acknowledging someone's pain without trying to fix it or minimize it can be profoundly healing. Music industry professionals started rethinking the rigid boundaries between performers and audiences. Several artists cited Michael's response to Rebecca as inspiration for creating more intimate, responsive concert experiences that prioritized human connection over perfect execution of planned shows. Educational institutions incorporated the story into their character development curricula, using it to teach young people about the importance of being present for others suffering rather than looking away from discomfort. The question, "What would you do if you were Michael in that moment?" became a common thought experiment in ethics classes. Religious and spiritual leaders from various traditions referenced the incident as an example of compassion in action, noting how Michael's response embodied the universal spiritual principle of seeing the divine in every person and responding to suffering with immediate practical love rather than abstract sympathy. Even years after Michael's death, the Madison Square Garden moment continued to influence popular culture. In 2015, a documentary film called When the Music Stopped explored the incident in depth, featuring interviews with Rebecca, Michael's band members, audience members who were present, and psychologists analyzing the interaction's profound impact. The film revealed details that hadn't been widely known, including the fact that Michael had been on the verge of canceling that night's performance due to his own emotional struggles with the negative press coverage. The decision to stop and connect with Rebecca had been as healing for him as it was for her, reminding him that his ability to touch people's lives was more important than any critic's opinion. Rebecca's life became a testament to how one moment of profound compassion can change a person's trajectory entirely. She went on to found the Sarah Morrison Foundation, which provided grief counseling specifically for siblings who had lost brothers or sisters to illness. The foundation directly helped thousands of young people process their loss and find meaning in their pain. In interviews, Rebecca often emphasized that Michael hadn't tried to fix her grief or offer platitudes about Sarah being in a better place. He just acknowledged that I was hurting, and he made space for that pain to exist without trying to make it go away, she explained. That's what grieving people need most, not solutions or silver linings, but someone willing to sit with them in their darkness and say, "I see you and your pain matters." The black fedora Michael had given Rebecca remained one of her most treasured possessions. She kept it in a climate-controlled case in her home, occasionally bringing it to speaking engagements as a physical reminder of that transformative night. But more than the hat itself, she treasured the lesson it represented about how objects can carry meaning when they're given with genuine love and intention. Michael's band members who were on stage that night often spoke about how the experience had changed their own approach to performance and life. "We realized that we weren't just making entertainment," said his guitarist Jennifer Batten. "We were creating spaces where human connection could happen. And sometimes the most important connection wasn't between Michael and the thousands of fans, but between Michael and one person who desperately needed to be seen." The incident also influenced how Michael approached his songwriting in subsequent years. Songs like "Will You Be There" and "Keep the Faith" reflected a deeper engagement with themes of mutual support, vulnerability, and the healing power of presence. He spoke in interviews about how Rebecca had taught him that his role wasn't just to be a perfect performer, but to be a real human being who could model compassion in public spaces. When Madison Square Garden underwent renovations in 1991, they created a small commemorative plaque near the section where Rebecca had been sitting. It reads, "On this spot, September 17, 1988, Michael Jackson stopped a concert to comfort a grieving stranger, reminding us all that human connection matters more than performance." The plaque became an unofficial shrine where people left flowers, notes, and tributes to both Sarah Morrison and Michael Jackson. The security personnel who worked that night at the Garden often reflected on how Michael's response had challenged their assumptions about crowd control and problem management. "We were trained to remove disruptions," recalled head of security James Martinez. "But Michael showed us that sometimes what looks like a disruption is actually an opportunity for healing, and the real problem would have been removing someone who needed help." Rebecca's advocacy work eventually brought her into contact with other people who had experienced similar moments of compassion from Michael at his concerts. She discovered that while the Madison Square Garden incident had been the most public and widely documented, Michael had quietly reached out to numerous individuals over the years who were struggling with grief, illness, or other hardships. These stories revealed a pattern in Michael's life of responding to suffering with immediate, practical kindness rather than distant sympathy. A young man with terminal cancer who met Michael backstage, a homeless family who caught his attention outside a concert venue, a grieving mother he encountered at a children's hospital, all had stories of how Michael had stopped his busy life to be present for their pain. "People think of him as this untouchable superstar," Rebecca noted in her 2010 memoir, Singing Through Tears, "How Michael Jackson Taught Me to Grieve. But the truth is, he was the most touchable, most available person I've ever met. He understood that fame was a platform for amplifying love, not for elevating yourself above others' humanity." The Madison Square Garden video continued to go viral with each new generation discovering it online. Comment sections filled with stories from people who had been inspired by Michael's example to stop and help someone in pain, rather than walking past. Teachers reported using the video at the start of school years to establish classroom cultures of empathy and mutual support. Mental health professionals particularly valued the video as a tool for teaching about trauma-informed care and the importance of validation in healing. "Michael instinctively understood principles that we spend years teaching counselors," noted Dr. Patricia Chen, a trauma therapist. "He didn't try to talk Rebecca out of her pain or rush her through her grief. He simply witnessed it with compassion, and that witnessing was itself therapeutic." The incident also sparked broader conversations about the relationship between celebrities and their audiences. Cultural critics debated whether Michael's response represented an unsustainable expectation for public figures, or whether it was an inspiring model of how fame could be used for genuine good, beyond mere entertainment. Rebecca herself weighed in on these debates, arguing that while not every celebrity needed to stop their performances for individual audience members, the underlying principle was universal and applicable to everyone. "You don't have to be Michael Jackson to notice when someone near you is suffering," she often said. "We all have the power to pause our own agendas and respond to another person's pain with kindness. That's not about being a superstar, that's about being human." As the years passed and both Sarah's death and the Madison Square Garden moment receded into history, Rebecca found that the lesson remained powerfully relevant. She often spoke at grief support groups, mental health conferences, and schools, always returning to the central truth that Michael had embodied that September night. True strength isn't about maintaining your performance in the face of others' pain. It's about having the courage to stop and be present for someone who needs you. The story became particularly poignant after Michael's death, when the world was forced to reckon with the complexity of his life and legacy. Rebecca was among the voices arguing that Michael's truest legacy wasn't his musical innovations or his groundbreaking videos, but his capacity for compassion and his willingness to use his platform to acknowledge suffering rather than look away from it. "He wasn't perfect," Rebecca acknowledged in interviews. "No one is. But in that moment when I needed someone to see me, he chose to be present rather than protected. He chose vulnerability over maintaining his image. And that choice saved my life in ways I'm still discovering decades later. The Sarah Morrison Foundation grew significantly over the years, expanding from grief counseling to broader mental health support for young people dealing with loss and trauma. Rebecca always credited Michael not just with inspiring the foundation's creation, but with modeling the approach it would take, meeting people where they are, acknowledging their pain without trying to fix it, and trusting that compassionate presence is itself a form of healing. In 2018, 30 years after the Madison Square Garden moment, Rebecca organized a commemorative concert featuring artists whose careers had been influenced by Michael Jackson. All proceeds went to grief counseling services for children and young adults. In her opening remarks, she returned to the central theme that had guided her life since that transformative night. Michael taught me that the most powerful response to suffering isn't to have all the answers or to make the pain go away, she told the audience. It's to stop, to see, to acknowledge, and to stay present. That's what he did for me, and that's what we can all do for each other. In a world that wants us to keep moving, keep performing, keep achieving, sometimes the most revolutionary act is to stop and care about one person's pain. The legacy of that September night proved that sometimes our most important moments aren't the ones we plan or rehearse. They're the ones where we follow our instinct to respond to another person's humanity with our own. Michael Jackson could have maintained his perfect performance that night. Instead, he chose perfect humanity, and in doing so, he created a moment more powerful and enduring than any flawless show could ever have been.